What's happening, guys? We're back and we're gonna get rocking on the steering column today. Alright, this is gonna be a long intro, so bear with me. Like we talked about last week, we're gonna get rocking on the steering column today. I came out yesterday and was kind of doing a little bit of planning for this episode, and I found there's kind of 4 major hurdles that we're gonna have to jump over with the steering column. One, we have to build a bearing carrier on that top steering column section. It has to be run fairly true and the bearings have to fit and yada yada yada. That's problem number 1. We have to mount that bearing carrier. It has to be really solid because it's gonna take all of our side to side force when we push and pull on the steering wheel. That's what's gonna take those lateral movements. And I know when I drive, I tend to brace myself against the steering wheel. So that bearing carrier has to be able to take all of that force and transmit it down into the chassis. 3, we need to extend our lower steering column. The chunks of DD steering shaft that I got are only 23 inches and they don't quite make it right to the steering rack. So we need to lengthen and adapt that lower steering column to fit the stock Mazda rack. And then 4 is that lower steering column runs right through the chassis. So we're gonna have to cut and notch out that chassis bar and build something there to retain some semblance of strength while still giving us clearance around the steering column. So while I was out here yesterday looking at those 4 things, I came up with a solution to one of them. The lower steering column has to run into this stock Mazda joint. You can buy a DD to 5/8 36 spline steering U-joint, which is what I would need to hook up to that Mazda rack. You can buy those if you live in the USA. In Canada, I would have to buy it through Summit, which they're like $100 for the joint, and then it's like another $100 to get it shipped here, and that's American, so it's $200 American, which is like $300 Canadian. It just wasn't worth it. So we're gonna use the stock Mazda joints off of the steering column. This is actually the upper joint, and then there's a lower one that goes onto the box, but this has the same spline count. So we need to adapt our DD steering column to fit into here. The idea of this is like 0.8 something, 0.85 of an inch. And our steering column is only 0.75. So I came up with a solution. I took our DD steering shaft and I actually chucked it up in the lathe. I had to build a little collet that would allow me to chuck this in the lathe. But I put her in there and I laid down the end a little bit so that it would fit into the stock Mazda steering column chunk. So I took and cut that steering column in half, and this is the upper section of it. And those fit in there like that now. We will drill a hole in here and rosette weld it, and then circumferentially weld it as well. Which should be good enough, but just to be sure, I also built a little collar. So this is 0.75 ID on one side, 0.85 ID on the other side. So that will slide over top of this joint, and we'll do the same thing. We'll drill it, rosette weld it, and circumferential weld it. And then we have DD steering shaft on this end, and stock Mazda steering shaft on this end, and that should be long enough to reach down to our steering rack. So that's one problem solved. We still need to weld it and everything, but we can do that later. So today I want to tackle the upper steering column section. So I picked up some seamless tubing that the bearing should fit in really nicely. We'll cut that to size and kind of figure out what we can do up at the top end there, and hopefully by the end of this episode have that at least mocked into the car and then we start kind of building our bracing off of that. So let's just do it. All right, we got the bracket on the top tacked in, and then we built a couple little brackets for the side at the bottom there and tacked those in. So now the tube is semi-stable in there. I threw in a chunk of our DD steering shaft and one of our U-joints. Unfortunately, I didn't account for the U-joint on the bottom, so it's a little bit low in the front end. So we're gonna have to break these tacks and just pick it up like 1/8 of an inch probably in order to clear the U-joint properly. And then we can kind of finish weld it and move on from there. But it's getting pretty late tonight, so I'm gonna call it a day, and then we'll come back tomorrow morning, pick up where we left off, and hopefully get this finished up. And we're back. It's bright and early in the morning because when you have a 1-year-old, you don't get to sleep in. So today we'll break those tacks and pick the front end of that steering column up, make sure that it clears the U-joint, and then we'll probably go ahead and finish weld everything up, maybe do a little bit of more bracing, and then we should be good to go. So let's crack into it. we got the clearance for our U-joint now. We got the whole thing kind of finished welded together, and then we drilled a couple extra holes to bolt this top bracket down. There's probably going to be a little bit more bracing that goes on with this kind of control bracket, but I don't want to do it until we have the clutch master cylinder in, and then we can kind of look at maybe cross bracing everything back a little bit better and whatnot. But that's looking really good. We got clearance on the U-joint. The upper column needs to get cut. Right now the steering wheel is way too close to the driver. We're going to cut it back probably 4 or 5 inches. Give yourself a little bit more room there. But yeah, that's all we're going to do today. Good progress. The next step is going to be working on the lower steering shaft section. The middle piece is going to be just a straight chunk of bars, so that part we don't really have to worry about. So the next step is going to be working on the lower, and I'm not going to do that until next week. So we're going to call an episode there, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, hit the like and subscribe button. Go check us out on Instagram, Left Foot First Media, and we'll see you next week. I'm out of here.